Hello and welcome back to the Unafraid podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey. I would like to start out up front telling you that my voice is going to sound a little bit funky this episode. I was sick last week. My voice hasn't quite recovered yet, so just please bear with me through this episode. If you haven't already, please rate this podcast on any platforms you're listening to it on. I do believe on Audible you can rate each individual episode. So if you'd like to take the time to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. If you haven't already, please share this podcast with anyone and everyone you can. Make sure it gets out. I will post this on the Facebook group page, so you can always share the update about the episode to your friends on your Facebook, and let them see it and hopefully bring more people into this podcast. So I greatly appreciate any efforts do that. I appreciate that you're here and you're listening to this episode. It's been interesting. I'm currently working on a few different episodes. Honestly, this is not the one that I thought would be posted next. I actually worked on this as I'm recording this episode. I worked on this today. I started it today, wrote it today, and finished it this evening, and am now recording it. So I expected it to be, one of the other 2 or 3 that I have currently that I'm working on to be posted first. And God said, no, this one. So I do find all this really interesting with this episode, which I will talk more about in just a minute. But if you're not already, be sure to follow me on the podcasting platforms. If you're on Spotify, be sure to follow me there. And also be sure to have some form of notification on so that you know when I post a podcast, especially since right now we don't have any sort of set schedule. So thank you so much for listening. If you choose to share it, I appreciate that. You listening to it and sharing it and getting it out there helps this podcast to get out there. But I appreciate each and every one of you for listening to this. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into the episode. So oftentimes, the moments of waiting are not really moments of waiting, but of training and preparation. David was a shepherd. He had much time during this period of his life to meditate on God, appreciate his creation, and learn to trust God and lean into him. It's during this time in David's life that he cultivated a heart after God's own. It's during this time that David learned how God cares for us. The shepherd David got to know the heart of the good shepherd. David was a great man and a great king because he never lost his shepherd's heart. David shepherded the people according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. Psalm 78:72. Never forget where you came from. Don't lose sight of your humble beginnings, of where God brought you from and what he brought you out of. Don't lose sight of your moments of waiting. Keep a heart of integrity and humility. Lean and trust on God always and in every situation. David never forgot where he came from. When he became king, he shepherded the people just as he had shepherded his flock. As I prepare this episode, I am studying 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 11, which is where this came from. But I find it interesting that I didn't intend for these words to be an episode. It's something I wrote down in the little notebook I like to keep of key points that I feel like are speaking to me right now. Things like verses on pride or lessons from the lives of people in the Bible. Things that are personal for me or that I'm working on. However, just yesterday, again, as I'm writing this episode, I went to a little training meeting for a Bible study that I will be co-leading in the fall. This church is also where the conference is held at the end of the study. Twice now I have went to this conference, and a handful of other times I have been to this church for other things. But for the first time, traveling the same road I travel every time I go to this church, I realized something a bit ironic. This road holds a bit of history for me. This conference is about freedom, letting go of things from the past, leaving your mess and the things that have a hold on you at the feet of Jesus and letting it go. It's also important to note that when I go to the conference, I travel a different road back every time because I don't go home at the end of the conference. I go to my home church. Yesterday, I got to thinking about how funny it is that I pass little spots that hold history for me on the road to freedom. I lay my junk down while I'm there, Even though that junk is no longer tied to that road, then I travel home on a different road, one that I don't think I had ever been down prior to attending this conference. I've been saved since I was 17 years old. I'll tell you all about that in a later episode. I am currently preparing that testimony episode, but it's taking some time to get it all written down. However, that road represents a version of me before I knew Jesus. It represents the deepest parts of my past and has some of the deepest roots there. How ironic that I drive through that road almost as a reminder of who I was before I go to a conference to grow in my relationship with God as who I am now. I don't think that is a coincidence. I think God made sure that was the case. It is indeed humbling to think 12 or 13 years ago I was living a life so separate from Jesus, and now I am living a life so completely for Jesus. So much so that I am about to co-lead a group for a study that is so incredibly life-changing. I'm hosting this podcast and trying to walk closely with God every day. And even though I fail, and often at that, I am still so far away from who I was then. What an incredible reminder of all that God brought me out of. As all of this dawned on me yesterday during this drive, I thought about the idea of an episode talking about this very thing. Then I thought, nah, I don't know what I would say. If God intends for it to happen, of course I will, but I don't know, I guess we'll see. Then God gave me this, and as I was typing the part about David, not sure where this episode was going, it hit me. I looked up with sudden realization and said, oh, that's what this episode is supposed to be about. When I look back at where I was and see where I am now, it almost knocks the wind out of me. Pre-Jesus me was so different from the person I am now. So remember where you came from. Remember who you were before Jesus pulled you out of the pit. Remember how grateful you were when you first came to know Jesus. Really know him and love him and be in relationship with him. Remember that fire you had when you first came into the faith. Remember that road you were on before you were set free and put on a new road. Remember your road to freedom. Never lose sight of that road. When you're waiting for God to move, think of all the times he already has. Ask yourself why you are in the waiting. Is God preparing you and equipping you for something that you may not see coming yet? God sees the whole picture, every detail. We see a piece. Sometimes God may be putting you in a time of waiting so that you can be still before him for a while. Or maybe he just wants you to take some time to rest in him. Or maybe he wants to teach you more first so that you will be better equipped for what he is sending you to. Spend your times of waiting leaning into the Lord. Remember the life he saved you from and the life and joy you've had since knowing him. Dig into his word deeply and ask him to guide you through it. In times of waiting, remember that you are being prepared and trained, and see it as a blessing and an opportunity for growth. Trust him to prepare and equip you, and don't worry about where you're going. Just trust the one taking you there. Ask him to help you through this period of waiting, and then trust him with all of your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will direct your paths. Proverbs 3:5-6. I know that we don't all have all the time in the world always to just sit and spend our days digging deep, but often the problem is less that we don't have time and more that we don't make time. Check your phone usage and see if God doesn't convict you. Ouch, I know, I went there. I'm no less guilty though. I don't even want to open my screen time report. I know I don't want to know what it says because I know how many times at the very least this week that I sat down to do my Bible study and ended up scrolling on TikTok for 30 minutes. Each swipe I'd tell myself just a few more, then I'm going to get on with my Bible study. Sound familiar? If not, you're either lying or congratulations. Good for you. You're holier than the rest of us. But for the majority of us out there, I think we end up scrolling, and then before you know it, 30 minutes has passed or an hour, and suddenly you've got to get that thing done or hurry up and get ready to leave, and there goes 30 minutes to an hour you could have spent with Jesus. The world is fast-paced. It seems like every year it gets harder to keep up. Take a breath. Look around at all God has provided and all that he has made. Take a moment to know the Good Shepherd and how he loves you and cares for you. Remember where he brought you from and thank him for where you are now. Don't forget your humble beginning, your road to freedom. We all have one as Christians, whether real or hypothetical. We all traveled a road to get to freedom in Christ. For For some, it was long. For some, it was brief, but we have one. One way or another, we choose to pick up our cross and follow him, traveling a new road, a different road. And at moments on that road, he is going to allow for roadblocks, moments of waiting, testing, preparing. Lean in. Then, when God calls, go, knowing that he has taken these moments to train you, prepare you, and equip you for whatever it is he is sending you to. Whether that be to help lead a group of people, start a podcast, or launch a ministry, maybe it could just be setting up a weekly coffee date with someone and sharpening one another. Just go. I will leave you with this. There are so many times I've thought, and I think we all have, who am I? Who am I to help lead anyone? Who am I to start a podcast? Who am I to post this nugget I got out of my Bible study today? The truth is, we aren't anyone really. We can't do any of these things. But God can. Really and truly, all God needs is our yes. If we give him that and get out of the way, he can do the rest. Give him your yes. I am not capable of helping to lead anything, but if I get out of the way, God can use me to do anything because all things are possible with God. What is impossible for man is possible with God. Luke 18:27. So lean in during your periods of waiting. Let him train, prepare, and equip you. Never forget where you started and give God your yes so that he can take you further than you've ever been and use you more than you could ever dream. There may never be a more perfect episode to say this, but remember to go forth with courage and boldness, knowing that God always goes before you so that you can always go forth unafraid.